present to everyone here Georgios Ouzonis, who is a high top research, who did his PhD in Groningen, where we met there during my stays there also. And he's going to present his work in satellite images in his company. Maybe you can explain a little bit more about yourself. And I would like to thank him to do this presentation, because I know he's a busy man, and I know for sure that we are going to learn a lot of you. So,
thank you very much, Lydia. Am I to start?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let me put on my glasses to look a little more professional. Okay, well, hello everybody, and thank you for this kind invitation. My talk today is going to be about a product that we just released yesterday, that is the Atlas of Human Settlements, and how we use that to support the agricultural sector. So I'm going to start with an introduction, because obviously there are some questions already. I can imagine, what do settlements have to do with agriculture? And past that introduction, I will spend the majority of the time explaining the features of the Atlas of Human Settlements. How do we use that for change detection, for forecasting? And I'll then take a break to switch into a different topic, that is the image data science, which is something that we pioneer as a company. And the reason why I'm going to present that is because, it all boils down into finding the right tools to advance the state of the art with regards to the data layers that we are producing. And lastly, I will close off with a quick use case and how all these comes together in order to address the agricultural sector with an example of a client of ours that is called Hello Tractor. Okay, so I like bold statements, and it is because of that I found this message by the African Development Bank that states, that is a 2023 publication, and they state that Africa's food and agricultural market could increase from $280 billion in the year 2023 to $1 trillion by 2030. Now, that is quite an interesting statement. How do you make this happen? And there are a couple of links here. I will share this presentation with you that you can follow to read some more about this. But actually, what stands out from a page that is from a company that is called White and Case. So they have a list of the 6 key layers that collectively, as they say, can ignite Africa's agricultural renaissance. And I'll read the titles of these. The first is shifting legislation and policies to support wider range of agricultural projects. Second is improving access to capital for private sector. Third is addressing the infrastructure gap. The fourth is resolving supply chain issues, improving productivity of small-scale farmers, and lastly, adapting to climate change. We touch pretty much in my company all these 6, but we emphasize in 3, 4, and 5. And at Atlas AI, which is a small Silicon Valley startup, we essentially excel in these 3 areas: logistics and supply chain analysis, market segmentation and demand forecasting, and asset monitoring and sustainability analysis. So what we do comes naturally into play in challenges like the ones that was presented in the previous slide. So throughout this presentation, you'll get to hear 3 topics that we put a heavy emphasis on. That is demand intelligence, understanding essentially the demand and supply for any given location in the world. Our mission, which is to promote inclusive growth. So whenever you're wearing the shoes of an investor, you're always interested about the return of your investment, but the way that we steer investors into the unexplored markets is done so that they maximize both indeed investment return, but also societal impact. We aim at making the lives of ordinary people better through the right choices of investment. And lastly, sustainability, which is, I guess, a trendy topic. So we are promoting eco-friendly and durable development. The data that we use is can be organized in three different categories. The first is urban fabric, and this is where the Atlas of Human Settlements comes into play. Infrastructure, such as roads and transportation hubs and so forth, and land use and land cover. Land use and land cover means, like the land classes that you find within habitated environment. Then we have the socioeconomic data, which are all proprietary. So we are producing information layers such as the asset wealth and spending power that measures the spending capacity in every square kilometer of Africa, for example, in US dollars per day. We have population and demographics and economic activity, which is sourced as an external signal into our practices. And talking of signals, we have developed capabilities and methodologies for doing change detection, change forecasting, and of course, we are consuming a number of environmental signals and indices from open sources as well. So in summary, before going into the Atlas of Human Settlements, for any given community or settlement that we're trying to analyze, we need to know the following things. Where do people live and their living conditions? Their access to services and infrastructure, population, asset and financial wealth, economic activity and mobility, environmental indicators, and lastly, socioeconomic trends, which come from the socioeconomic data layers that we're producing. Now, let us take a look at the Atlas of Human Settlements. I'll start once again with a statement, quote, "Human settlements are the footprints of the anthropogenic environment, and knowledge of their extent and fabric is often the first and most important prerequisite in socioeconomic analytics." If you are talking about analyzing socioeconomic conditions, obviously it all makes sense knowing where the people live and how is it that they're living. So the Atlas of Human Settlements now is a data layer. It is a built-up base map, essentially, of global coverage. It is delivered at 10 meters of spatial resolution, and it is updated annually with legacy layers that go back to 2016. And you might be familiar with an equivalent open source product that is known as the Global Human Settlement Layer. I'll put these two in a comparison. I work on that product. I was actually in the team that released the very first version 10 years back. But there are a number of issues that we have identified with that, and that is why we pushed for the development of the AHS and the commercialization of it, just because it actually stands in so many fronts above the GHSL. So closing the introduction on Atlas of Human Settlements needs, I need to just add the last line, that it is the most up-to-date, commercially available product offering a holistic view of any habitated environment across the world. And it consists of two different types of layers. It's the built-up layers that emphasize on the built-up, not buildings, but built-up as a concept, and the settlement map, which considers the aggregation of built-up. So I'm using the term built-up as opposed to buildings because at 10 meters, it is highly unlikely to be able to see individual houses. So if these are in Europe, for example, where houses are not particularly big, and they're less than 100 square meters in size, then at 10 meters resolution, it is highly likely that you'll miss them. Whereas in America, size matters, so big houses, and yes, you'll get to see these. But anyway, that is not the case across the globe, and that is why we refer to this layer as a built-up layer. And that is made of the built-up index that is telling us in a spatial unit of 100 square meters on the ground, what percentage of that surface is actually built, and that is the BUI, or built-up index. Then we have a different layer that is the built-up confidence. That is the AI's confidence that for that spatial unit, we have indeed built-up residing in there. And when we threshold that, which is done through an operation that is optimized for any geography separately, then we end up with what we call the built-up surface, right? That's a binary layer that tells us that here there is built-up, and there is something else. And that's the built-up. So now when you spatially aggregate that, that gives you the opportunity of defining the construct of a settlement. And a settlement is nothing more than, indeed the collection or the aggregation of all the buildings or built-up to be found in any given location. And since we are doing an aggregation process, an obvious thing that we can compute is the settlement built-up density map. and the gradient map, which is telling us essentially the magnitude of the transition between densely built areas and less densely built areas. Now, through the AHS, we can both ship external data sources neatly cut into the extent of the settlements, or produce a number of different data sources internally, so that we can best describe any given location with as much information as possible. Typically, we're looking for any settlement, the features such as the settlement morphology, size, shape of a city, for example, the texture, the terrain, surface, and elevation, the land use and land cover, like green spaces and water bodies inside a city, cadastral information, which is ingested from external sources, the infrastructure that mostly we compute ourselves, we segment it ourselves, but sometimes we do make use of external sources as well. Then we have population and demographics, and that is quite interesting, because actually, if you are familiar with the way that population layers are being developed, you will see that they have census data, and then they try to find some source of geospatial information that they use as a reference in order to do spatial disaggregation of that census data. Now, everything that we've seen out there is of poor quality, and what is worse is that it doesn't get updated as often as we want to or we wish to, so that we can do this systematically. And this is how we use, for example, the AHS, the Atlas of Human Settlements, in order to compute a different layer that we call the Atlas of Human Population, AHP, to produce a way sharper estimate of the number of people, the population density at any given part in the world. Then we have the socioeconomics, where I mentioned before two rather distinct indices that we're producing as a company: the asset wealth index, that is telling us in every settlement across the world, and if you subdivide that perhaps in a grid, what is the in a scale of 1 to 10, what is the asset wealth, the average asset wealth of the population residing in there? And asset wealth can be defined in a number of ways. So, for example, the ownership of a car, of a television, of a mobile phone, a computer, and so forth. And the one that is super powerful is the spending index, that is giving us the dollar amount that people can afford spending on a daily basis. And that comes in by correlating survey data with satellite imagery directly. That was the first version of this technology. Right now, this correlation is considering the AHS to make things crisper, sharper, and specific not only to the presence of built-up or to the presence of man, but actually specific to the types of the settlements as well. So despite the fact that it's a 10-meter resolution layer, you can still see big buildings or open spaces, all those indicators that tell you something about the prosperity level of the people that reside there or not. And lastly, economics, that again, these are indices that are spatially disaggregated through the AHS into semantics that describe every settlement separately. And here are some screenshots of how this thing looks like. That's the built-up index. This is a very, very large mosaic. This is Washington, D.C. and Baltimore in the United States. It's a heat map. And I've got a few more screenshots. This is Berlin and Paris, and we'll dive into some greater details in the next few slides. This is Los Angeles. This is the base map of Los Angeles. And this is the built-up index. And let me zoom in a little bit further. That's Los Angeles again. And as you can see, well, perhaps the color doesn't help, but there are a lot of small white dots in here that illustrate the presence of individual buildings. They're all way too densely populated areas. When you've got large sections of these cities that are the industrial sections and the warehousing sections, this is where all the products that source the West Coast are being stored. And this is Inland Empire, that is to the east of Los Angeles, where indeed you've got massive centers, warehouse centers for the entire supply chain of the West Coast. I'm saying massive because, like any of these small white buildings that you see in reality is something that has a surface, a footprint surface of about 100,000 square meters. That is pretty big. And putting this into comparison with the GHSL, I just found an area there that I'm just showing for the sake of illustration. You see the level of detail. You cannot really get the building footprint out of this image, but you see where the actual buildings are. And starting with the smallest ones all the way to the very big ones, there's a crisp representation about built up. Whereas in the case of the GHSL, you've got results that look like this, which are not particularly useful, at least in the case of the analysis that we are running locally. Change detection. Now, one thing is to know where people live and what is the built-up over there. It is a whole different story, and even more powerful, knowing how does that change over time. And change detection methodologies are particularly useful for a number of studies that we do, and I will show you how. But let me just start with the fact that ML approaches exist that do change detection. They are super complicated, and the biggest challenge is finding correct data sets to get them trained. And these are not easy because you're always working with pairs of images. And if you leave these on the side and you consider traditional approaches, then the problem is that you do find change neatly. You do not know what kind of change that is though. So over here, I've got a pre and a post image, and the red vectors illustrate what changed. So you see in the post image, obviously, quite a number of areas have started to being built. So we correctly detect that as change. But then if you see things like this, I'll toggle back and forth where I'm having my mouse cursor. So then we have, for example, changes in vegetation as well, which are the non-desirable changes. So if we are to do change detection of this kind, that is the least demanding one, but directly on semantic layers, such as the AHS, then we've solved really the problem, because we know that we're looking for changes in built-up. So if we compare any two images, a pre and a post, of the exact same area, and in those images we just imprint our target class, which is buildings and built-up, then problem solved, really. And to test out this hypothesis, we run an exercise in Ukraine where obviously change is massive due to the war there. So we picked up an area, that's Mariupol actually. We picked up a photograph before the war, that was September 2021. And we picked up a photograph that was a few days past the fall of the city to the Russian forces. And one most recent one, that's a month and a half ago, of how things look today. And we put this into comparison, obviously not directly pixel to pixel, but semantics, because if you see actually here, this is spring and this is fall in the other two. So if you do a pixel to pixel comparison, everything will appear as change. But if you do the semantic layers and you compare these ones, then this is what changed between before the war to the fall of the city. That is distraction. So the warmer the color, the bigger the magnitude of the damage that this area has sustained. And then from the fall of the city to today, the exact opposite. They've been into a sprint of reconstructing the area. So the warmer the magnitude, or the warmer the color is, the bigger the magnitude of the reconstruction effort, the density of the built-up that shows up. And I'm not going to go into great detail. I'm just having one example of each. This is a before the war image, and this is the after the war. So you see that this building has been burned, and these ones have collapsed their roofs and so forth. So again, I can toggle back and forth. If you compare semantics, you get these pinpointed. So you know that the change is accurately detected. And there's another example of construction activity. So this is the day of the fall of the city, that was spring, and a year and a half later, there is this massive effort in rebuilding this area, and this is how it looks today. And again, the change detection is telling us that all these red areas, yellow, red, are indeed the new built-up that has been established with respect to the original capture. The fact that we do change detection actually allows us to capture I mean, this is obviously an extreme case in Ukraine. But if you take an area that undergoes change through normal processes, not aggression or no natural disasters, but just as a result, for example, of economic activity and development, then this activity and development is imprinted into the assets on the ground. You're having new buildings showing up, older buildings perhaps demolished, and other ones taking their place. And the development can be witnessed through the built-up activity. So this trend that says a lot about the economic activity can be witnessed through built-up. And we are capturing this trend. So we are gathering the change from historical instances of the AHS. And with that, we are training very sophisticated ML methods that allow us to do forecasting in the near future. That is not about 10 years or 20 years from now, which is what some people do in forecasting. We want to know, if we're having an investor that is asking us where to put the next mall, for example, we want to know where the build-up is likely to occur. And we see in the case of the United States where there are areas that are completely transformed, I wouldn't say overnight, but within a year's time, you see entire new cities stretching out in the desert, or in other places where there is substantial economic activity. I'm saying that because I used to live in Colorado. I left Colorado to go to New York in 2017, and I returned 5 years later, and I just couldn't find my ways anymore. There was so much new development that it was just literally impossible to believe it. And all those areas, one common thing they have in common is the fact that there are no services. Nobody anticipated, where are we going to build the next school, or the next mall or gas station, or you name it. And it is because of that being able to forecast, being able to predict where things are going to happen, allows the investors to plan accordingly in time and make sure that the proper services and facilities are in place when everything is ready to be delivered. So we do a number of different attributes, forecasting of a number of different attributes. What you see in the screen is population forecasting at a hyperlocal scale. Hyperlocal scale, by the way, refers to a kilometric grid. And we use this term because that differentiates with traditional or conventional forecasting approaches that consider an entire state, for example, or perhaps cadastral subdivisions of this magnitude, but not really the individual spatial units. And this is our reference data. What you see in orange is positive change. In those areas, the population grew, whereas in purple, the population reduced. And this is what we forecasted. And I actually believe that I might have the labels wrong. I think that this is the reference data, and this is our forecast. But in any case, this is putting apples to apples in the comparison. This is how the forecast looks. So we have correctly predicted how much the population is going to grow and where. And of course, there are some errors, but in this kind of exercises, a reasonable expectation is to have an accuracy reflected through the R² metric of about 80% and above. So this is where this data layer sits, and that was very satisfactory. So we do that also for build-up. So we can say, where the next cluster of buildings is going to be, and this is particularly useful indeed for planning. All right, so I'll take that pause from the AHS here, and I'll switch the topic, because the important thing that needs to be mentioned here is how do you manipulate all that data? And for that matter, we have introduced what we refer to as the image data science framework. And I will start perhaps with a very brief introduction. Pretty sure that most of you are familiar with that, but what we refer to as structured data. Structured data are organized data that is readable to the machines. So we're looking at any tabular file format, such as Excel files, CSVs, JSONs, and so forth, is what we refer to as structured data. Whereas unstructured data is data that humans communicate between them, but machines struggle to understand it. And examples are indeed images and video files and photos and emails and so forth. So, but if you take a CSV file, it is not really structured data. It goes through an interpreter. It's bits and bytes. And it goes through an interpreter, and it's the interpreter that is making it or delivering to you as a structured data set. So we based on this idea, we devised this technology that is also doing the exact same thing with the image content. So it is a common perception that images are unstructured data. So we just built that interpreter that reads the image information content and interprets that in a way that is computer or machine readable, meaning the content itself, not just the pixels, right? So it understands the relations between pixels and what constitutes a legitimate object and what not. And in this image data science framework, we have two modes of operation. We have the one that is supervised, so the person or the user interacts directly with the image content, and he produces segmentations that make sense, that is running queries like SQL queries directly on the image space. And we've got a fully automated, fully unsupervised that reveals what is standing out from that image. Let us see the first one. This is a neighborhood in Istanbul, Turkey. And the objective here is to segment those buildings. And the user is asked to essentially provide a couple of examples, just a handful of examples of what is it that he or she is looking for. So what happens then is that there is this directed acyclic graph that is being computed, that is encoding the image information into the graph space. And in that graph space, we're collecting statistics that allows us to create n-dimensional feature spaces. And in those feature spaces, this is just a 2D cross-section. So we're seeing with a reference point here at the top left, we're seeing in the x-axis size of objects in the logarithmic scale, and in the y-axis going down, we see increasing compactness. So we see an interesting thing here. There is this reddish energy element, strong energy element, that is suggesting that there is something of repeating pattern in the image that falls within that size range and within that compactness level that is repeating again and again. So when we see the content of our selections of those green rectangles, we actually get a confirmation. This is, the repeating pattern that we're after. It's the buildings. So going over there, this is an interactive panel, and clicking a few more of these switches and pushing this decision back into the graph allows us to create a custom segmentation that is done on the fly. There is no training here. There is no ML. There is nothing. It's just a segmentation that is being produced literally on the fly, and you can adjust the quality of it with manipulating a couple of constraints. It's pretty neat, but that is not addressing our needs, because we want things to happen at scale, and at a planetary scale, actually. So we need to devise fully automated methods. And I'm showing an area, once again, at the Inland Empire in California, where we run a couple of these experiments. What you see here is referred to as the LSD layer. It's not the LSD that some might be thinking of, even though the colors resemble. But the acronym LSD stands for lifetime, scale, and dissimilarity. This is a decomposition scheme for graphs. So we're getting a neat segmentation of everything that stands out in there, which is our assets of interest. We're interested in infrastructure and in warehouses and industrial buildings in this case. But once again, we have that problem that we don't know what each of these polygons are, right? So there is some that correspond to background elements, and we've got some neat polygons that correspond to building footprints. So what we do now is if you think of this polygon that the LSD is delivering as a vessel, what we're doing is we're pouring in the AHS, and we're telling this that the relevant polygons that we need to leave behind are the ones that have a strong signal from the AHS. It means that the AHS is marking buildings, but you see we have these imperfections here. Whereas in the case of the LSD, we're having a perfect building outline, but we just don't know if this is a building, and the next one is not, for example, or the other way around. So the AHS is indeed giving us that signal. So then we have the perfect segment, and the AHS is confirming its identity, that it is indeed a building, and it is of that size that is of interest to us in order to track down supply chain assets. So doing this at 10 meters resolution allows us to create a set of markers that mark all the buildings of interest to us in a vast area. And we throw those markers in the VHR domain in the very high resolution imagery. This is 30 centimeters satellite, or aerial actually, imagery. And then we use the very latest, the state of the art that is coming out from Stanford University, where we have close ties with foundation models to do the unsupervised segmentation of that image. And we get neat building polygons like the ones that you see. With these building polygons, then, and again, in the very high resolution space, we can actually start profiling our assets. We can find, we know where the buildings are, so we know where to train and segment, for example, for solar panels, or for the near proximity features to the building that tells us the class. So these are all warehouses because they've got loading bays, and we see containers and other cargo vehicles nearby. So, you know, that is giving us, revealing the identity of the building. So we do the classification, and then having got that area, that polygon that describes that building, we can go back to the 10-meter resolution domain where we've got a lot of historical data for free. That's Sentinel-2 imagery, and we can crop the contents of those areas, and we can start doing what we call the historical profiling of assets. So a lot of our customers are asking us, okay, we want to know, when was a building delivered? When did it start its construction? And when was it delivered? And what kind of a building is it? And what are the attributes describing it? What exactly is its purpose, for example? So as you can see here, you know, all these instances are being gathered from the historical data, and we source them into a classifier after labeling them. And that way, we have an ML model that allows us to scout the land, vast coverage imagery, and find early signs of new construction activity, be able to classify what that construction is likely to be, and inform investors or customers about competition, perhaps, about progress of their own projects and works, and so forth. And so far, I described, you know, industrial and commercial assets, but you can think of this also as a natural extension into agricultural assets, meaning that, you know, we have silos, we have processing plants, we have all the elements in the supply chain that is related to the agricultural sector that can be detected and evaluated and assessed and even forecasted in the future using the exact same methodology. And lastly, I would like to spend a few minutes in the use case of the Hello Tractor. Hello Tractor is a company in Africa that what they're doing is, I'll read out this text. Their mission is to improve the livelihoods of the people in any given community by revolutionizing the way in which farmers can access mechanized agriculture, lowering traditional barriers such as the cost and access. So meaning, you know, think of it as a company that has 100 tractors. None of the individuals in small villages in Africa can afford to have a tractor, but they can rent it out, right? That is equipment that is mostly unutilized throughout the year. So they can rent it out for the extent of time that they need it and do their work and maximize their productivity. So what we were tasked to do was to come into this project and do demand forecasting for increased tractor asset utilization. So they wanted to know, when is the demand the most, where, and quantify that such that they can address this demand accordingly. And perhaps, if they're done with this area and it doesn't coincide, the demanding period doesn't coincide with let's say the high demand in a different country or location, perhaps they can shift their fleet over there and address the needs of a very different community. So pay attention to these highlighted words, because this is bringing us to the first slides. I mentioned inclusive growth. So the company obviously makes the maximum out of their investment, but at the same time, it aims at improve the livelihoods. So this is inclusive growth. This is living an impact, helping the local communities. And for Hello Tractor, when more people have access to mechanization, it doesn't just mean more revenue. It means more people have the opportunity to increase production and reduce food insecurity. Now, this is very important for many places in Africa. So that brings us back to sustainability. And by better understanding where and when demand is likely to occur, Hello Tractor can optimize allocation of its resources and ensure a fluid supply of tractor services for all who need them. Demand intelligence and forecasting. So that completes, in a way, the picture. That is how we come into this and how we support the agricultural sector. So Atlas AI enables Hello Tractor to anticipate, monitor changes to the economy and societal well-being within their supply chains to create inclusive growth. Because, you can think of this statement as telling you that, all right, we've got the tractors. Can the people still afford to rent them? If we are doing dynamic pricing, we need to know how much these people can spend a day. Can they afford to do that? Or can they just take a loan in order to be able to afford to do their harvesting, their production gathering with these services? So once again, we're looking at inclusive growth. So with this, Hello Tractor improves livelihoods by increasing the accessibility of tractor supply to more people through proper demand forecasting. And our mission there was to identify factors that can most influence tractor demand, develop a continuously updating ML model to predict the acreage demand for tractor services, and offer near real-time insights. It's never really real-time, but near real-time insights into current and predicted operations. So what we used over there is a number of external data sources. I'm using vegetation indices. I mean, obviously we computed them, but the input data was Sentinel-2 imagery, weather information, and climate-related information, historical jobs, supply-side indicators, and agricultural activity. And through the AHS, we produce data such as population density, demographics. Do we have enough young people to go to work on the farm, for example? The wealth, can people afford these services? The infrastructure, if they gather their production, where are they going to stock it? Where are they going to put it? Otherwise, it makes no sense to go through that effort at all. And lastly, development. So through the AHS, these data layers were produced and sourced into this model, and we came up with something that left them speechless. And this is actually a good example to show how the AHS, which might be misleading because it talks about settlements, is actually helping the agricultural sector, and in one of those very vulnerable areas of the world, that's the rural Africa. So demand visibility unlocks opportunities such as pay-as-you-go underwriting, asset allocation, hub placement, and geo-marketing. And with this, I like to close it here and pass the ball to the audience for any questions. Thank you for listening to this presentation.
Thank you very much, Georgios. Are there any questions?
Yes. Okay. I have one. Thank you. This is Mr. Ouzonis. I would like to, since you are dealing from the technical point of view, I mean, image analysis, I guess that you are dealing with different external sources. You don't own your own satellite
Exactly.
satellite data. How it is, how complex is because okay, different sources. Probably you have to align the satellite data. Is it complex? Where did you find the most challenging problem in the processing prior
Uh,
to the forecasting and so on?
oh, if regarding forecasting specifically?
No, prior.
No, prior.
All
Be-
right.
Before doing, you know, the
Right. So yeah, I think the data sources are, they can be found by in abundance in the Western world, United States and Europe. It is the African continent and South Asia where these are data sparse environments, and a lot of the data needs to be constructed internally. So for this, we try to utilize as much as possible open sources that are usually surveys, and map the information and into a platform that allows us to do this correlation between what we know for certain, which is the presence of man through built-up, and for example, the occasional questionnaire that is going to tell us somewhere over there in that part of the world, in a radius of 5 kilometers, for example, there is a person that is making or can afford spending $10 a day. So that's how we start. We have, like, for the case of Africa, we have about 10,000 data points collected on an annual basis, and that refers to the entire continent, right? And then using these AHS layers, for example, allows us to construct a model that splits this into a kilometric grid, so that this information is correlated with the presence and type of buildup, and based on what else we see elsewhere that matches this pattern, to spatially disaggregate it and cover the entire continent. So the biggest challenge was not that, right? This is PCA-based machine learning, so it's rather simple and straightforward technology. The biggest challenge was indeed creating an accurate atlas of human settlements, where we can use that in order to make all those correlations and then spatial disaggregations. So I think that having established this technology, and I hope that this is inspiring you all, you've solved the biggest challenge out there. The rest is, even if it's small in quantities as data, that suffices most of the time. So provided you have a reference layer, how to distribute it.
No, I guess that you work on the basis that, I mean, a client, I don't know, a company, a government demands you forecasting or a study of a certain area, or are you working, I mean, in a broader sense? Because I guess that the computing demand, of all this process is so huge that probably you work as well on demand. You have
Yes.
clients that say, please study me or give me, a report about this area.
Exactly. So indeed, we do that, and the reason why we do that is because the data sources for every geography vary substantially. So we have the base, the core products, and then the studies themselves are tailored and fine-tuned to every specific location based on what else is available there. Our customers are usually very big institutions, such as the World Bank or the Rockefeller Foundation or the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So these institutions, they would like indeed to monitor the evolution of things in any given geography, keep track of what is changing, and forecast what is to come. So depending on where their interests are, we try to utilize as much information as possible from open sources. If we don't get what we need, and we contract agencies to do this data collection for us. But the whole idea is that you cannot do this at scale, meaning that you cannot go in an entire African continent and ask everybody, how much do you make, for example. You have to get samples, and with those samples to do the extrapolation in a way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Georgios, can you tell us which techniques are you using for processing the data? Just name the models or techniques or.
I'm not sure to what extent I can do that without being fired, but yes.
Okay, so.
But,
Next
no,
question. It's okay. It's okay.
So the core technologies that we use are indeed deep learning methodologies that involve advanced structures. So we start with things such as encoder-decoder networks, or LSTMs, for recurrent neural network computation, and a couple of basic architectures that we couple together to develop more advanced ones. So the forecasting, for example, uses a rather unique and proprietary schema that combines the LSTMs with encoder-decoder type architectures. So we have devised our own architectures there to be able to do this. But I have to tell you that the ML part is not the biggest challenge. Data is the biggest challenge. I think that we spend most of our time engineering our data correctly because we cannot use the raw data. We need to engineer that data ourselves. And with that at hand, the ML is rather straightforward, rather trivial. Today, there's an abundance of tools and libraries you can use to proceed, in the way that we want it. But finding the data and then engineering it is the absolutely biggest challenge. And I think that this is where individuals are very successful if they can indeed provide services in this space.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, finally, good data produce good results almost with any way, with any technique. So, if there are no more questions, thank you very much, Georgios. Nice to see you, and thank you for admitting to doing this presentation, and hope to see you soon. Okay.
Take care. Have a good day there. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.